everyone. My name is Jennifer Dominic. I am the founder and CEO of wenite. So today we have a guest, David, who has joined us today. So David, if you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is David Peacock. I am currently serving as the managing director for MSD in the United Kingdom and Ireland.
Okay, so David, tell us about your career. How did you get to your current position today?
Well, it's been quite a journey. I've been out of university now for, I don't even know, a long time. Let's just say that. But I actually started my career with MSD. I started in the United States, where our company is known as Merck. My first job was, it was a very interesting role. I was called a market development associate. It's very similar to kind of like a sales representative type role.
Okay.
However, at the time, my job actually wasn't really selling anything. My job was to help prepare the market for a new drug that we were studying in phase 3 at that time for the treatment of osteoporosis. At the time, this had been the first treatment for osteoporosis in decades. And so no physician really diagnosed women because there was no way to treat them, so why bother diagnosing them? So my job was really to go out and to educate physicians and educate the broader community about the fact that this disease was prevalent and there were technologies to diagnose it and there were treatments on the horizon. So really to build a market. And that was my first role. I was based in Boston, Massachusetts. Great place to be when you're young.
That sounds fun.
A medical hub in the world. Yeah, it was fantastic. Every day getting out, going out, and really trying to do good and have an impact and help patients get to care. And then when the drug finally was approved by the FDA, I mean, it made just a huge impact. And we were kind of the first, and ever since then, osteoporosis therapies have come out, and it's no longer kind of the disease that it was, right? Women don't, have as many hip fractures, spinal fractures, etc. So that really, I guess it speaks to a lot of why I've spent my career in this industry. It's fascinating from a business perspective, but at the end of each day, I go to sleep knowing I've made a difference and a positive difference in someone's life. And so, yeah, from that role, I was given the opportunity to move to our U.S. headquarters, so from Boston down to Pennsylvania, and I became an analyst. The best way of describing it is I spent my days staring at a computer screen with Excel sheets.
Wow.
Tons of data, tons of learning how to use Excel, building macros, and trying really a couple of things. Support our marketing teams to understand what was going on in the marketplace. And there was another piece where it was actually creating kind of sales incentive plans for sales reps and others.
So that was quite a different role then in comparison to the first one. But from what you're saying in terms of the analyst perspective and what you were doing to support the teams, there's still that red thread that continued in terms of the competencies and capabilities as you moved roles.
Yeah, no, it was a challenge because it was something completely different from being in a role where I was independent, right? I was working out of my house. To now going into like an office environment and being given a whole new tools, and it's a culture now. I have to actually go to lunch in a cafeteria, but that was also, it was exciting because I was just sucking in knowledge every day, being surrounded by people who were passionate about what they do, and so many people were doing things I'd never even heard of. I didn't really know much about marketing. We had whole departments that we, training. It was great, and so. Yeah, I did that for a couple of years and then left to actually go back to school and went and got my MBA.
Okay, so that's interesting. So why an MBA at that point in your career?
So an MBA, I never really planned on it, to be quite honest. It's one of those things in life, there's a bit of, serendipity. I started the process of applying for an MBA before I took that role in Pennsylvania. I was in Boston. I literally went to get some groceries, was walking home, and there was like a newsstand there. And on the newsstand back then, there were magazines. Like these days, you don't see people selling magazines on the street anymore. But Business Week every
Okay.
year did an issue on MBAs and the rankings, and I happened to just buy that magazine, and I read about it, and I read about the benefits of an MBA and what it brought, and it just got me excited, and I thought maybe I should try, and that's it. I wanted the opportunity to expand my horizon and learning, because I was just so hungry for knowledge. And when I read that article, I realized there was just so much more to business than I was seeing in my day-to-day job. And so that's kind of what kick-started that process.
So that's a really, sort of big decision to make. How many years into your career were you at the stage when you decided to make this decision?
It was relatively early. I was probably 3 years.
Wow.
About 3 years in, when I looked at it. But that also, was roughly the age, right? And 3 years in when I said, okay, I'm going to do this, and then it was probably another year or so before, you got to take all the tests and the application process, which is horrible. Writing tons
Very
of
intense,
essays.
yes.
Yeah.
So I guess congratulations on then, I guess, getting on the MBA. And then what next?
So following the MBA, my original intent was actually to come back to the company, because I really loved the company. I loved what we did. But I had mentors, and I'm very thankful for them. And what my mentors said is don't. They said, don't come back to the company. Instead, go out there and do something completely different. Go into a space where you can accelerate your learning. And what they specifically said is, go be a consultant. And at the time, I had no idea what a consultant was. To be quite honest, I'd never met a consultant. I didn't know anything about them. But when you go and get the MBA, the consulting companies would come and kind of present, and it was all very exciting, working across different industries, all types of problems. It was all very intimidating, quite honestly. I never thought I'd actually get a job with one of them, but I went through the process, and I was lucky enough to get a job working for a company called Bain, and based out of their Australian practice.
Wow. Oh, so a completely different country.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't sound it, but I was born in Australia. So I had a connection in a way, there were roots. But yeah, it was an exciting opportunity. Bain at the time was growing really, really rapidly. And so they had come to the US, and they were bringing in kind of classes of MBAs, if you will, to support their work and their growth. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to get one of those jobs.
Okay. And how long did you do the consulting work for then?
I worked for 3 years with Bain, maybe a little bit less. Tremendous experience. I learned a lot. It was brutal. I'll be quite honest about that. Right when I went, so I graduated from my MBA in the year 2000, which for those of us that are old enough, recognize 2000 was the year of kind of the dot-com crash. It's kind of when a lot of the froth came out of the market, all the startups started collapsing, and the global economy went into a short recession. And during that time, consulting companies very much rely on the macroeconomic situation. And so when companies need to cut back and save expenses, one of the first things they get rid of is consultants. And the knock-on impact of that on Bain was Bain started shedding people. And so keeping your job actually became a really competitive thing. Like, it was hard. You had to prove every few months that you were worth keeping on. And so my time at Bain was incredibly enriching because of what I learned. I got to work with some of the smartest, most driven people I have ever met before. But to prove myself was brutal. I think, and I did, I tracked my hours. And over that 3-year period, I averaged 80 hours a week.
Wow.
Which means weekends you work. It was hard, but I learned. I mean, I learned so much. I worked on so many different industries, so many different problems. It was fantastic. But towards the kind of end of that period, those same mentors that told me to go to business school, or not go to business school, from business school to go be a consultant, said, time to come home.
Okay.
Come back to Merck. I had a choice at that time because I had also started talking to a friend, a guy I had met and mentored who had also come to work for Bain. and he had an idea for a startup. And so on the side, I started working with him on this startup concept, and we actually built a company called NUUN. And so I said to Bain, I'm going to go. And they were very nice about it. And they just said, look, actually, why don't you just take 6 months off to reconsider your decision, because, you know, you've survived, you can stay. And I really, you know, I'm thankful they gave me that opportunity. The people at Merck said, fine, take 6 months, think about it. And so I was given the 6 month window. And during that window, we really worked together and we built this company, NUUN. At the end of it, I had a decision to make. Do I go down the entrepreneurial startup route, or do I come back to kind of the biopharmaceutical world, where I had just a deep passion? And a part of it just came down to risk. I didn't have money in the bank. And so I was scared of going down the startup route, because it would have meant years of, you know, just lean living, versus a really solid job in a company I cared about and made change. And so I made the choice to come to Merck. The startup went on its way. The startup was successful. It's still around today, years later. In fact, it was just purchased by Nestle for a sum of money that I can't disclose, but let's just say if I still owned it, I would be retired. I am very proud that we created something. We created a product that is sold all around the world. It's a fantastic product. It's a fantastic company. So I'm actually very proud of where they took that initial concept of ours and ran with it. But for my career, I went back into Merck. I went into the US and was provided an opportunity to work on a marketing team, which was, yeah, very, very cool.
Okay. Wow. What a transition. So I think just across that entire journey, one of the things I think I've heard is, you know, whilst you're quite risk averse and coming back into the organization in which you love, you also took those risks in, number one, going to do an MBA, moving into consulting, and then into a startup before then coming back to Merck to do a marketing role. So tell us a little bit more about, you know, when you moved back to the US, what was that transition like, having just worked the last 3 years in Australia?
So it was much harder than I anticipated. The pace of work within a large company like ours versus consulting, where you're on assignments for a relatively short period of times and you've got deliverables, was very, very different. I was fascinated by the work. But outside of work, I was bored. I started doing Ironman competitions because I needed something beyond my computer.
Something beyond work.
Yeah, and but that evolved. I went online. I started dating online. Back then, that was a big thing.
Back then?
Pardon?
What apps existed back then?
There were no apps back then, just to be clear. There were websites, Match.com.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's still around, I think. Yeah, but I actually met my future wife on, my current wife, not my future wife, my current wife on Match. Us coming together then started an amazing adventure since, because from being in the U.S. in those marketing organizations, and I had a couple of roles there, I was then given the opportunity to move to Singapore to become the marketing and corporate affairs director for our subsidiary in Singapore, which was fantastic. It was the first time I was actually really given an opportunity to manage my own department and group. Plus, it was just like an adventure going to Singapore, a place I'd honestly never been.
How did yourself and your current wife make that decision to transition over to Singapore?
I remember that night very, very vividly. Doing the interview at night, because obviously the time difference with Asia, got off the phone, turned to my then girlfriend, and said, I got the job. I really want to do this. Would you come with me? And she said yeah, which was incredibly brave of her. And then that led to a marriage proposal. And then we started the adventure. We moved to Singapore and then went on to spend, I think it was 12 years in Asia from that point.
So that's a beautiful story. Absolutely beautiful. And I guess Singapore is probably a place you always remember for that reason.
Yeah. Jennifer, that's the name of my wife as well, as you know. But she also, for her own career, started teaching in Singapore as well. And that led her on to her own professional development. And she did amazing work across Asia. For me, in Singapore, it was a very small market relative to the United States, obviously. But I got to work with an incredible and dynamic team, really test out who I was going to try and be as a leader, right? And when I say test, I mean truly test different approaches, failed frequently, learned things, and built over time. And I'm always thankful to that first team that I managed for allowing me to kind of practice, if you will. But we built an incredibly powerful team. It's a team that still comes together. I mean, this is literally now we're like, 16, 18 years later, that team still comes together every year. I did that for about 2.5 years, I guess, 3 years. I had achieved basically all the goals that had been set before me within Singapore. And I started telling my managers I was bored. Just saying, and the way I knew I was bored is I started signing up for Ironman again. So, if you're signing up for something that requires like hours of training per day, you're not being challenged enough at work. So I started talking to my managers and saying, look, I'm bored, I need a challenge. And the gentleman that was running the sub-region of Asia at the time just said, look, there's a challenge I've got this amazing managing director in Vietnam. She's been there for a while. We're trying to rebuild a subsidiary there. It was a country that we had been in the past. We'd pulled out. We realized it was a mistake, and we were trying to build. And he said, she's really good, but she needs help, right? With your consulting background, can you go in and help her build out kind of what would be the 5-year plan to build a thriving subsidiary to serve the people of Vietnam? And I went over and spent time working with the managing director there. We got along really, really well and built an amazing plan for the company to invest in Vietnam and really hopefully drives substantial growth. What happened is we presented our plan to the regional management, and I was then to go back to my job in Singapore and work. I was still always doing my job in Singapore. And at the end of the presentation, they said, this is fantastic. You've got the full investment. The only criteria is, David, you have to move to Vietnam to help execute the plan. And I went home. I talked to my wife. I said,
another conversation.
What do you think about Vietnam? She's like, never been, let's go. And so that then became a transition to Vietnam. Jennifer, because of the reputation she had built teaching in Singapore, she actually had a job in Vietnam before we even got there.
Wow.
Just based on how good she was. And I'm incredibly proud of her for the work that she did, because she helped start up a school in Singapore that's still there. And built such a strong reputation that she was just in demand. And so went to Vietnam, spent a year in Vietnam. My job there, we had we'd gone through a merger at that time between MSD and Schering Plough. Mm-hmm. And so my job in Vietnam was really bringing those two businesses together, integrating them. There were a number of other kind of challenges going on around the world, and so I won't go into the depths of those right now, but after about a year in Vietnam, I was given the opportunity to move to Japan to help establish a group there focused on strategy and really completing the integration really of 3 companies, which was Bio-pharmaceuticals, which is a long and historied company within Japan, MSD, which is our kind of global company, and then Schering Plough. And so my job was really, how do you bring these 3 together and integrate and create an aligned future? And so that's what I did. I established this group that started off with just a couple of us thinking, how do we develop a 10-year roadmap for the company in Japan, and Japan is was at the time our second largest market in the world. And we brought a team together and putting into practice many of the things I'd learned in both Singapore and Vietnam, building a really high-performing team. And as the team grew, it took on more and more responsibility, and we started building things and this is now 10 years ago, hiring data scientists, building out digital capabilities, starting to run commercial operations, and really trying to drive change into a giant organization. And we had a baby in Japan, my daughter Grace. And the next opportunity I was given was to go to Hong Kong, which was my first role as a managing director for Hong Kong and Macau, which was just a huge step up. I was really thrilled to be given that chance. It's a job that I have admired for so long. But I quickly learned that I didn't fully understand. We moved from Japan to Hong Kong, and I spent 2 years in Hong Kong as managing director. As I said, I underestimated the complexity of the managing director role when I actually sat in the seat and saw the breadth of what goes on to ensure a company is being well run. It was a big wake-up call for me. There were a lot of weekends worked, just a lot of time in my head thinking, am I doing the right things? Am I bringing the right people together? We spent 2 years there. I'm very proud of kind of the change that we drove. We were very, I'd say, kind of creative, entrepreneurial in terms of how we shifted the market. We took Hong Kong, and I say we because there was a whole team once again that were brought together to do this, but we took that market from kind of like, being roughly flat, I'd say below $100 million in revenue. I won't get into the specifics, but 3 years later it was well up over 400 million. It was dynamic, it was growing, we were dominant because of some of the choices we made, and it was choices across the breadth of our business. And so, yeah, things were flying in Hong Kong. Everything was good. Was happy, was enjoying it, starting to get into exercise again, doing some crazy races. And then I got a phone call completely out of the blue, which I wasn't expecting at all. And that was from a woman named Caroline Litchfield, who at the time was leading finance for our global commercial organization. And I thought I was in trouble. I thought I had done something terribly wrong, that why would she possibly be calling me? And she called to say, there's an opportunity, would you be interested in going back to Japan as the head of finance, which in Japan is actually literally called the chief financial officer. There's in our company there were kind of two. There's the real one, and then there was the Japan one, which was a legacy of it being an independent company from a title. So she said, would you be interested in? I quickly just said, you do know I've never worked in finance. Mm-hmm. I don't have any experience, and what she shared is that she'd seen me in my job in Japan previously, giving presentations, and she also said, you don't need to worry because there's an incredibly strong team, and they will teach you and support you, and you in the meantime can bring your commercial knowledge to help support them and hopefully drive some change there. And so I took that job, and so we took my family, which now included a son, who was born in Hong Kong, back to Japan.
Okay.
New chapter. Now I'm working in finance, learning tons of stuff, not just about finance. I was really trying to lead a team that was finance, it was procurement, it was our facilities team that ran our buildings and sites, and other areas that did kind of meeting services. It was a broad array of things, and my job was bring them together, find alignment, obviously see how could I help the business to perform better, and that was my role in partnership with the managing directors for Japan, and how do we kind of shift that business forward. As I said, I learned so much. The way I describe it is those functions really serve as kind of the guts of the organization. They're the parts of the organization that so many people overlook and they undervalue. But what I learned was those functions are the strength of a company. And you can create tremendous value if they're running well for everyone else. And that was a really important lesson, and I've never ever forgotten it. I will never kind of just say, oh, well, that person works in facilities, or that person, like, in the almost dismissive thing, because I know what they can do, how much they can drive a company forward. And so great lesson, very thankful I was given the chance. Then what happened? Our CEO was coming to visit. Our CEO at the time was a gentleman named Ken Frazier, and he used to come to Japan once a year and visit. And he was coming to visit, and my managing director had said, "Hey, you have to have a one-on-one with the CEO." And I still remember at the time saying, "No, I don't. I don't want to sit one-on-one with him." Like, I was terrified. What am I going to talk about? What am I going to say? And anyway, he forced me into a one-on-one, and we had a really good conversation. It was a very straightforward, frank conversation. Him getting to know me. We talked about all sorts of things: leadership, the business. He put me at ease, but at the same time, it was clear that he was sharing things with me. And it was a great discussion. He had left, and then he came back for business purposes not that long afterwards, and I had another one-on-one with him. And at the end of that conversation, he just turned to me and said, "Would you be my chief of staff?" It's Ken Frazier. So for those of you who don't know, you can look up Ken Frazier, and you'll get a sense for, you don't get many opportunities to work with somebody like that in life, or even to meet people like that in life. So it took about a year for everything to kind of process through and work out. But I was given the chance to move into our corporate headquarters and serve as the chief of staff for Ken. The job itself was a big wake-up call once again. It was very similar to when I had gone into finance and my eyes had been opened to a broader world. Going into the office of the CEO, like, the world just became, so gigantic in terms of the horizons. And when I looked at the breadth, once again, that he was dealing with, it's one of those things where you sit there and you go, wow, I am just not worthy of being here. Ken brought me there, and he was always very clear. I was brought to learn. He didn't need me. He didn't need me to be there. He didn't need a chief of staff. He's like, you're being given this opportunity because I see potential in you. Your job is learn. And that's it. And hands off. He said, the door's open, right? You can basically do what you want to do, right? There are jobs. I had to organize agendas for our executive committee. I had to get involved in projects and strategies, do a lot that I ask of you in your role. But the chief objective was get and understand the complexity, understand where the organization works well together, where it doesn't work well together, build relationships, start building trust with more people, because at the end of the day, organizations are about people, and trust is the currency of achievement. And so that's kind of what I did. I spent a year and a half with Ken. When he kind of came in and said, you're done, which was a shock at the time, but he brought it back. He said, you are here to learn. He's like, from what I'm seeing, you've learned. You need to now go on and do. And so, once again, thrown out into the mix, what am I going to do? And this job and opportunity came up to come to the UK, and I've been now working in the UK and Ireland for just over 2 years. Wow.
So, and I guess, before we round up today, what next, after such a fruitful, what I would call fruitful anyway, an adventurous career path so far, what next?
So there's still many things I haven't done. My objective always is for any any role that may come next, right? I want to know two things. Am I learning? Because otherwise I get bored and I start exercising. Am I learning? And then the second thing is, am I contributing? I want to know, those are my two criteria as I evaluate any opportunity. Beyond that, I'm open, right? I'm not one of those people that says, like, I just want to be the CEO, or I want to do this role or that role. That's not it. I just want to know, am I learning? Am I making a difference, right? Am I really adding value in to the company? If I see a role that gives me those two opportunities, I'll do it.
Perfect. That makes sense. And I think with that, I would like to say thank you so much for volunteering your time to come in here and share your story. Thank you everyone for watching. Like, subscribe, and I hope to see you soon.